Hi, Karen. Really nice to chat with you.
Thank you, Melissa.
Let's start by getting to know you a little bit and tell us about what has caught your interest in this work around the last stage of life.
Yeah. I think, a lot of it is to do with when you've had lived experience, right? Unfortunately. And you go through a process and you sit down and start to weigh not only your process and your grieving and all the tough stuff, but how, I guess, the gaps for me and the support mechanisms that were out there. And I'd consider myself a relatively smart lady, and I still found some of the systems and the gaps really difficult. And that's the last thing you need sometimes when you're dealing with one of the biggest things that you'll go through in your life, right? I mean, birth and then there's death. And both of them are big, but I think when you get to end of life, there's so much lost, particularly if you've lost your partner or someone at a younger age. That's when you kind of sit down and go, right, okay, I've got this process that I have to deal with. And I often used to think as I was applying for things and going, oh, gosh, if I was older and I didn't have access to a computer, if I didn't speak English as my first language, how would I cope? I'd be a basket case. So I guess it got my eye to think about how others are dealing with it, given the ordeal. Wouldn't call it an ordeal, given the process I went through.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just such an overwhelming time, isn't it? Both practically and emotionally. Are you happy to tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, look, I've unfortunately I've had a group of experiences. So about 7 years ago, we lost our son. That was probably a little bit different because it was very sudden. So the process of grieving and understanding that was a little bit different. But then within the space of 8 months, I lost my husband, my mum, my father-in-law. They were all my mum and father-in-law were on the same day, and my husband was 5 days later. And then 8 months later, I lost my best friend. So it's kind of like your whole support networks just disappeared in one foul swoop. And probably for two of them, I was involved in all of them, but really two were probably my husband, my best friend, because my mum and my father-in-law were all at the same time. So you have to kind of make choices, right, about where you're going to be when. And I live in different states and in a different country to my father-in-law. And so your support network is very different. And then what I guess they're kind of dealing with a lot. For me, a lot of it was by myself, but I had an amazing network of friends that really stepped up. But yeah, just going through it and trying to navigate it, and not really knowing anybody that knew that it had gone through it to give me advice to say you need to think about this and go and do that. It all kind of came from the medical field, which is, they were amazing and wonderful, but it's very different advice than life advice, right?
It is so different, and I don't think it doesn't always align, does it, with the
Correct.
kind of life advice that you might be looking for. So that's a lot of caregiving in a short period of time for you, Karen. Um, can you talk us through a little bit the experience with your husband, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. I think, when he first got diagnosed with cancer, it was brain cancer, and of course he had to have a rare form. It was a shock to both of us because it certainly wasn't something that we expected. And we really, I'm a bit more on the optimistic side. So, of course, for me, I'm like, well, we can get through this. And I think I've listened to one of your podcasts and you talk about hope, and that's the best thing that gets you through day to day, I think. And then you go obviously through the medical field, and they're incredibly helpful, but they can't give you any kind of black or white answers because, quite frankly, they don't know themselves what's going to happen. And I do believe it's such an individual thing that they just can't give you the same answer all the time. But I am the Google expert, and so I spend a lot of time doing that. And I like to ask questions. I love a plan, so give me a plan, and then I can start to work my way through that. So I guess we did all of that. Did all the first lots of treatment. He came out really good. looking well, and we thought, this is fantastic, we're on the right track. And then it just went downhill very quickly. And it was really only, I think, when we'd actually would move from Melbourne to Brisbane, and that was his wish, that he wanted to live somewhere warmer, and would move to Melbourne for my job. And I felt that it was the right time to move to where he wanted to go. And he, very cynically put it, well, if I'm going to die, I'd like to die somewhere warm. And I'm like, well, you're not going to die, but, we'll move anyway. So, and then really when he moved up here, the cancer came back, moved out of his brain and into his spine. And it was 5 weeks from when they'd found it again to when he passed away. So there's a lot to do in 5 weeks, because you're still in that hope phase and you're still kind of managing everything. But when you've got 5 weeks to get your life in order, and that was actually the words, I think, from the doctors, is you need to go home and you need to get things in order now. And of course, you're sitting there going, what do you mean get in order? You think your life's in order, but it's not in order in any way, shape or form. All those big things are not in order.
Yeah. Gosh. How were things for you and Jeff after that conversation with the doctor? Were you able to talk to each other honestly about what you'd heard and what that meant?
Yeah, it took us a while. We had the entire weekend to talk about it and really take on board what they had said to us. A lot of crying. I think we'd actually had lots of conversations throughout the time, but it was really, brain cancer takes away them, right? It takes away his cognitive ability to a degree. So that was always hard sometimes. But we also did have the hard conversations, and probably not always everything that you'd like to talk about, but we did talk about, what a good life we had had, and we definitely had some very tough moments on it. But we also talked about what we had to do, the practicalities of, planning a funeral, a health directive, getting our wills in order, really horrible stuff that you kind of put together as you're getting older, when you get up to your adult grown-up life. But when it's finite, that's when you have to get a little bit hard on stuff. But yeah, so we had the conversations. Yeah, we had some tough conversations, but it was a lot of, the doctor has said, because we just moved to Queensland, get your family and friends up here to say their last goodbyes. So, of course, I just go into organising mode of, right, what order, who comes up when. I didn't want to overwhelm him. So we kind of planned every couple of days someone would come up, and those were really hard. Oh, my God. When people were leaving and we knew it was the last time, we were just, it was horrible.
Yeah, gosh. And horrible, and so beautiful that you were able to have those last goodbyes, but gosh, it's a torment of emotions, huh?
Yes, it is. It is. And
Um,
that like for Jeff, he had really decided, after our nephew and niece came up and spent the most wonderful weekend, like we had an amazing weekend, and he was done then. He just said, I'm done. I think I've got, there was a couple more people that were trying to stretch in, but he actually then, I think it's a real mental thing. He just said, I'm out. And I then said, I don't want you to go, but I don't want you to be in pain either. This isn't right for you. So we have to do what's right for you ultimately, not what's right for me. And I think sometimes people get that the wrong way too. People struggle with letting go, and I get that, but I think you have to think of them. I often used to think, God, if I was in his shoes, I wouldn't want to be lying there like that and feeling like I'm a burden or I'm in pain. It would be horrible.
and was Jeff able to talk to you much about where he wanted to be in those last couple of weeks? How did he talk to you about that?
Well, we asked him. And to be honest with you, the health directive and the funeral stuff was actually the stuff that helps you to prompt those conversations. So I had talked to him very openly about where he wanted to pass away. Did he want to be at home? Did he not want to be? He was incredibly practical, my husband. So his words were, I'd love to be at home, but if it doesn't make any sense practically for you, then do what you need to do, and I'll be completely okay about it. And then, of course, his sense of humour was so wicked. He's like, I wouldn't know anyway, so just do what you need. So yeah, we actually had all those, how he wanted to be um, uh, remembered, how he wanted to be cremated. All of those things were tough conversations. And then the whole, when you're going through the health directive, the resuscitation piece, or not. If he'd had voluntary assisted dying, he would have taken it, and I certainly would have. And I hope that's not offensive to anybody, but I would have definitely supported that for him,
Mhm.
because there's no coming back from what they're going through. And that's for me, was like, you just prolong it. So let them go when it suits them at their own pace.
Yeah, and I'm just, curious, given that you were able to have those conversations, what did that mean for you as Jeff's wife and as his caregiver? Do you think that made a big difference to how you were able to go through those weeks and also after his death?
Yeah, it gave me real clarity. I didn't second guess. And quite frankly, I didn't have anybody to have those arguments with him. And his mum and sister were in the US. They were dealing with, Jeff's stepfather who'd been unwell. So there was a bit of chaos going on there. And they understood that his wishes were going to be driven by him. And I wanted to respect his wishes. Um, but for me, yeah, I thought it was good, actually. I just came away feeling comfort and confidence that I could deliver him what he wanted to be delivered when he finally passed away. So during that stage, but when he finally went. So there were a couple of things I overrode. Like he said, I don't want any celebration of life. And I just said, well, I'm in charge when you're gone. So we'll do that. Um, and he laughed. He said, yes, no, you're right. And we didn't do anything big, but it was just an intimate gathering of some people that we just really wanted to recognise him. And mainly family and friends were what we did. But yeah, there were a couple of things. But I'd already told him I was going to override that. And he just laughed, saying yes. But I think it was good, actually. I felt like I got a lot more direction out of it. And like I say, for me, peace as well, that I wasn't second guessing. And it's a hard time to go through. So to be having to sit there and start thinking about planning a funeral when I kind of already knew what I had to do was really clear. And he was a simple man, so he wanted very simple things. So it actually did make it a lot easier, quite frankly.
Yeah. And, no doubt, I think anyone listening to this that has been through that experience of caring for a loved one knows how hard that is, right? Regardless of the circumstances, even if you are reasonably prepared for that person's death, it's an incredibly hard time of life. I'm
Yeah.
curious about the things that you might look back on and think were actually really positive. What maybe there were some unexpected things that happened in those weeks that remain really precious memories. Can you talk to that at all for us?
Yeah, look, he had a very good sense of humour. So, and of course, because his cognitive ability had changed, but his sense of humour hadn't, which was really interesting. In fact, I think it got a bit worse. But so we spent a lot. People talk about lockdown. I was in Melbourne in lockdown. We were down there, and I, bizarrely enough, had actually given up my very successful career to take a year out in 2019, not really knowing, and it was really a bit of recovery from our son and me wanting to kind of get my act together a bit and thinking what next, and probably do a bit like you did with your career. When you have a highly successful career but something significant happens, you want to do a bit more purposeful stuff. So I kind of gave up that, and then we went back to the US for 3 months, which is where he was from. So we got to do a lot of wonderful things there, and then lockdown came. And I then started working for myself, but meant I worked from home. So I could be 100% his caregiver, completely focused, because I worked around the times that I needed to work. But I was able to take him to every single hospital visit. We would, walk every day. We spent so much more time together than we would have if I was working full time, because I had a very busy job that did require a lot of international travel. And so I actually say COVID was a bit of a blessing for us because we couldn't go anywhere, but it meant that we spent an awful lot of time together. I think the first few weeks were funny. I kept thinking I was a bit too noisy in the house. It's like, I'm used to this peace and quiet. You come in and you're like this ball of energy. So we got our rhythm going, but we spent a lot of really quality time together, and we actually really made it so when the second diagnosis came with the 5 weeks, we just said, right, that was probably the harder bit because he really was a lot more into the care mode versus
Mm,
the other bit was more when he was taking his chemo and radiation. He was probably a bit weller during that period, so we could just do more things. And whether it's going for lunch somewhere or walking the dog or watching a movie together at home. So we had a lot of really nice quality. I think we had 2 years of really, well, it was 2 years before he parted, but probably 18 months of really strong with each other every day, which for us would have been a bit unheard of before. One of the challenging times I felt was in that period from when he got diagnosed, where do you find the help? Like, it's all right, it's all very medical. It's not the other stuff, right? And you're in and this I'm assuming what Violet does, you're in such a process and a routine with your medical that you miss all the other stuff along the way. And it's, I remember things like, when he couldn't get in and out of the car applying for a handicap parking permit, it came after he passed away. And I'm sitting there online feeling like I have to sell a kidney to get a parking permit. I'm like, oh my God, if you saw him, you can't even get out the car. And it was just stuff like that. It like helped look, unfortunately, we didn't need so much financial help, but I thought, you know what, you may as well tap into some of the services. But, they're so under resourced that you
so hard
just
to
don't.
find them, isn't it? So hard to find
Can't
them.
find them. They're complex. That's when I was like, God, if I was 100, this would be a nightmare. These poor people, how do they survive? Who
Yeah.
supports them? Which is probably what drove me a bit to this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were to, offer some advice to people who might be listening who, might be caring for a partner or a parent or a friend, what words of wisdom would you share?
Gosh, I think it would be about have those conversations and spend the time. Um, and patience. There were times when I probably wasn't as patient as I would like to have been, mainly because he went missing. Um, but
Really?
I talk back to myself about that, going, God, I should have been more patient. But I think under the circumstances, people would understand. But you're hard on yourself, right? And I think you are very hard on yourself trying to get everything right, and you don't get it right. You do make mistakes, and I think you have to forgive yourself a little bit on that. But yeah, for me, it was time, it was honesty, and making sure that you get those tough conversations in place. When I did it for my girlfriend, she told me everything she wanted, but she hadn't documented it with her family. So it was interesting that she felt okay to tell me. And fortunately, like a family's like my extended family, so I was able to walk them through the process. But her everything about whether she wanted to be resuscitated, I think she could tell me because she know I'd gone through it as well, which is why your service is good, because when you've experienced it, you can actually then kind of help move and nudge things along probably.
But I think there's also a little bit of safety for people when they're talking to someone, a friend or, maybe one of our guides just outside of that immediate family circle.
Yes,
Because it's so hard to open those conversations with your immediate family sometimes. That's where we need some help and we need some coaching.
correct. Well, family dynamics, none of us know, right? And that's it. I often think about that with family dynamics. Who's got your best interest at heart? And when I went back to that point about what Jeff wanted versus what I wanted, it's actually not about what I want. It actually was all about what he wanted at the end of the day. And if you can learn to let go of that and do what they want, that's a good outcome all round, in my view.
Thank you for talking us through that, Karen. It's a pretty extraordinary set of stories and set of people in your life, and I think you bring enormous experience and wisdom. I know that you've shown an interest in becoming a Violet Guide with us, and gosh, I hope that happens because you'll be able to help so many more people on their journey. But really grateful for the chat.
You're very welcome. And I think it's a wonderful service that you're offering and much needed. And if we can make it all come together, I think it'll be a great outcome for those who are unfortunately in their last stages of life.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thanks.